I woke up on the cold floor, the wooden boards damp beneath my palms, my body shaking not from the cold but from something I couldn't name. The light outside had just started to rise, that eerie blue glow of early morning casting long shadows across the walls of the old cabin. My throat was raw. My skin burned. I looked down and saw angry red scratches running up my arms, my chest, my neck. And across from me, written in something dark and glistening on the cracked wall paneling, were the words, "You were silent. He came." I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember anything. Just a vague weight pressing down on my lungs, a pressure that felt like screaming, except I hadn't made a sound. The day before had been so normal, or at least I thought it was. I'd driven up to the mountains from the city, 7 straight hours of winding roads, past empty fields and forgotten gas stations. The cabin had been my grandfather's, a crooked wooden thing tucked deep in the trees, untouched since he passed a decade ago. I hadn't visited since I was a teenager, and even then, it had felt like a cursed place, steeped in shadows and old dust. Still, after everything, the burnout, the breakup, the city noise that never stopped, it felt like the right kind of escape. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere real. I arrived late afternoon, the sky already bleeding into orange as I turned off the engine and stepped out. The silence hit me first, not peaceful, but dense, like a sound vacuum. No birds. No wind. Just a stillness that made my ears buzz. The front porch creaked as I stepped up to the door, and my key stuck for a second in the old brass lock before turning with a gritty snap. The air inside smelled of aged timber and something sour, like mildew soaked into the bones of the place. I didn't remember that scent from before. But a lot of things had changed, and memory's a slippery bastard. The inside looked almost untouched, old hunting rifles on the wall, plaid armchairs with yellowed fabric, a grandfather clock in the corner that hadn't worked in years. I dropped my duffel bag near the hearth and walked through the rooms one by one, checking for animal nests or rot, but it was all just dust and time. I lit a fire, opened the windows to let the mustiness out, and by nightfall I was sitting in front of the flames with a can of cheap beer and the kind of heavy quiet I thought I'd been craving. Nothing happened that first night. Not really. I went to bed around midnight, the bed frame groaning beneath me, the sheets rough but dry. I remember thinking how peaceful it all was, the crackle of the fire in the next room, the soft groan of the trees outside. I fell asleep quickly. But then came the sound. A single crack. Sharp. From the main room. I sat up in the dark, heart hammering against my ribs. I waited. Nothing. Just the settling groan of the old house. I told myself it was probably the wood contracting. Cold air, old beams, normal stuff. But still, I crept out of bed, bare feet silent on the floorboards, and walked into the main room. The fire had died down to embers. The clock on the wall, the same one that never worked, had its hands stuck at exactly 2 o'clock. I stood there, staring at it, confused. I'd sworn the hands were at 12 when I arrived. Sworn. But maybe I'd misremembered. Maybe. I went back to bed. Told myself again, just wood creaking. Just an old clock being weird. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me and closed my eyes. And when I woke, I was on the floor. With the scratches. With the blood on the wall. With no memory of the 2 missing hours. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, I moved through the house like a man caught between a nightmare and a hangover, my body aching, my mind fogged with questions I couldn't frame into anything coherent. The fire was cold, the air inside the cabin unnaturally still, and that scent, the sour, earthy reek, had thickened overnight, coiling through the air like smoke. I avoided the writing on the wall, but I didn't clean it off. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Something about the way the letters curled, like they'd been dragged rather than written, made my skin crawl. It was too precise, too deliberate, and too unlike anything I could imagine myself doing, even in a daze. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself I must have had some sort of sleepwalking episode, maybe brought on by stress or some kind of breakdown, but deep down I didn't believe it. That kind of thing doesn't leave you with bloody fingernails and half-moon bruises across your chest like you'd been gripped by something you couldn't see. I went outside for air, trying to shake the rising unease, but the forest wasn't any kinder. The trees leaned closer than I remembered, their trunks blackened with age, bark peeling like dead skin. There were no birds, no squirrels, not even the whine of insects, just the sound of my own footsteps on dead leaves and the occasional whisper of wind that felt more like breath than breeze. I didn't stay out long. The silence had weight here, the kind that settled into your lungs and slowed your heart. Back inside, I sat by the window and stared at the unmoving clock. 2 o'clock. Still. I tried adjusting the hands, but they wouldn't budge, stuck tight like they'd rusted in place overnight, though the wood frame and glass face showed no sign of damage. All afternoon I kept busy. Swept the floors, aired out the linens, even scrubbed some of the mildew off the cabinets, but I couldn't shake the prickling on the back of my neck, that sense that the house was watching me, not from one place but from all places at once. Every creak of the floor sounded deliberate. Every gust of wind through the open window carried a breath of something colder than it should have been. Around 6, I tried to call a friend just to hear another voice, but the signal was dead, not weak, but non-existent. Even the emergency service line wouldn't connect. I'd seen horror films, sure, but real life didn't work that way. Or so I thought. I turned the phone off and tossed it onto the table, pretending it didn't feel like a lifeline being cut. Night came faster than expected, swallowing the cabin in a darkness that felt thicker than it should be, as if the windows were no longer letting the moonlight through, only the shape of it. I lit every candle I could find, the old ones with wax that smelled like dust and old paper, and sat in the living room with a second beer I didn't want and a fire I couldn't stop staring at. Time moved strangely, the flames never seemed to shrink, the shadows didn't shift. I kept glancing at the clock, even though I didn't want to. It was still stuck on 2, those black iron hands like spears aimed at nothing. I told myself I wouldn't look anymore. I told myself I'd go to bed before midnight and sleep through the damn night. But at exactly 2 o'clock, something shifted. The lights blinked, not out, just once, like a spasm, and the fire snapped violently, throwing sparks against the stone hearth. Then the world just halted. Every sound, the wind outside, the crackle of the fire, the hum of electricity in the wires, all of it died in an instant. Even the air stopped moving. The candle flames froze mid-flicker, as if caught in a photograph, and the shadows on the wall stopped swaying. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare move. A coldness swept through the room, not like winter chill, but like standing beside an open grave. I tried to speak, to whisper something, anything, but my throat locked shut. My lips parted, but no sound came. It was as if the silence itself was alive, pressing down on me, forcing obedience. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. Minutes, maybe. An hour. Maybe more. Time didn't flow. It staggered. The air got heavier with each passing second, the pressure behind my eyes building like something was trying to burrow its way in. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the house, maybe behind the walls, maybe beneath the floorboards, I heard something breathe. Not human. Not animal. Just breath. Long, slow. Wet. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything that might make it stop, but I couldn't. My limbs didn't respond. My jaw wouldn't move. I could only sit there, a prisoner in my own body, while that breath grew louder, closer. And then it stopped. And everything else resumed. The fire flickered. The candle flames danced. The shadows moved again. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because even though the room had come back to life, I knew that something else had awakened with it. And it was still in the house. I remained in that chair for what felt like an entire lifetime, my back aching from the tension, my fingers curled so tightly around the armrests that I could feel splinters working their way into my skin, but even that small pain felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. My ears strained against the renewed quiet, listening for that breath again, for any sound that would confirm this was something real, not just the byproduct of solitude, sleep deprivation, or the strange alchemy of isolation and memory that the forest so generously offered. But the silence that followed wasn't natural. It was a hollow, predatory sort of silence, as if the house itself were holding its breath now, waiting for me to move so it could resume whatever it had been doing before I interrupted it with my presence. Eventually, my muscles loosened, one by one, not from courage but from exhaustion. I stood, legs numb and unsteady, and moved toward the hallway like I was wading through syrup. The shadows had changed again, no longer dancing but stretching, reaching, forming twisted shapes that didn't make sense from the flicker of a flame. I passed the mirror in the hallway and forced myself not to look, because I knew if I did, I wouldn't see myself anymore. There was a heaviness on the stairs, each creaking step accompanied by a pressure on my chest like invisible hands pushing down, as if something was following a step behind, matching my pace, breathing my air. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. Whatever was there didn't need to be seen. It was in the walls now, in the floorboards, in the very air I was breathing. The upstairs hall stretched impossibly long, lined with doors that hadn't been there before, each one slightly open, each one revealing just enough blackness to suggest depth but not enough to offer understanding. I moved toward the guest room, the only room that had felt untouched, unlived in, somehow resistant to whatever was poisoning the rest of the house, but the door was already open. The bed was stripped bare, the window shattered inward, as if something had come through, not gone out. The cold that poured from that room was deeper than winter, thick with rotten old metal, the kind of cold that doesn't sting but settles in your bones and stays. And yet, beyond it, through the trees, I saw light, faint, yellow, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something in me broke free then, an instinct older than reason, something primal and wordless that told me I had to leave, not later, not tomorrow, but now, because whatever had been teasing me, whatever had been showing its edges and breathing through the cracks, was done waiting. I didn't take anything with me. No jacket. No phone. No keys. Just my body and whatever fragments of sanity I could still carry as I stumbled barefoot down the stairs and out the front door, not bothering to close it behind me. The night was wrong, sky too low, stars too bright, and the trees bent as if whispering secrets to one another, but I ran anyway, crashing through underbrush, scraping against bark, each breath dragging through my throat like glass. I don't remember how I got to the road. I only remember that when I saw the headlights, when I heard the low hum of a car engine pulling around the bend, I didn't even feel relief, just numbness, like waking up after a fever dream. The driver didn't ask questions. He took one look at me, pale and blood-smeared, wild-eyed and shaking, and simply unlocked the door. I didn't speak the entire ride back to town. He didn't either. Later, when I returned with a police escort and 2 locals from the town, one of them the woman who'd rented me the place, the cabin wasn't the same. The windows were intact, the hallway was short, the rooms plain and harmless. No writing on the walls, no shattered glass, no smell of rot. Just silence. But it was a different kind now, not threatening, not heavy, just empty. The woman looked puzzled, even mildly offended, like I'd accused her of selling me a broken appliance. The officers shrugged it off, clearly used to weekenders from the city freaking out over a creaky house. I knew better than to argue. I didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. I just left. That was 5 months ago. Since then, I haven't been able to keep a clock running past 2 a.m. Every time I buy a new one, the hands freeze. My phone restarts itself at that exact hour, the screen turning black for one long breath before returning to life as if nothing happened. I still wake up some nights with the taste of ash in my mouth and the sound of that slow, wet breath echoing in the room, even when I'm alone, even when the door is locked and the windows are closed. The house is still listed online. Same photos. Same price. But now the listing says something it didn't before, a tiny line, barely noticeable at the bottom, for long-term rentals only. Not recommended for one-night stays. They've learned something too. But not enough. It was the breath. The house breathed. I swear to whatever God might still listen to cursed, empty places like that, it breathed. I saw the windows contract like lungs exhaling, the wooden frame shuddering in rhythm, and then they expanded again, wide and full, as if pulling in a long, shivering gulp of night air. We were already outside by then, standing in the frozen mud, soaked in panic and sweat, staring like fools at the thing we had tried to escape from. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This started 2 nights earlier, when we still laughed, still drank, still believed that the only things that hunted you in the woods were ticks and raccoons. The cabin was somewhere near the Vermont border, deep in a patch of forest that even the GPS gave up on. No signal, no neighbors, just a sagging wooden frame wrapped in snow-heavy pine trees. It looked innocent in the daylight, like something you'd see on a holiday card, the kind of place you'd imagine roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories you never believe. God, we were such idiots. There were 6 of us. I drove. Emma picked the place. Her boyfriend Tyler brought the beer, too much of it. Mia, well, she was the one who heard it first. The whisper. The first night felt normal, even sweet. We lit a fire, cooked pasta, and got stupid drunk. The cold outside was brutal, but inside it was warm, maybe even too warm, like the heat clung to us like sweat. The chimney groaned a bit when the wind picked up, but we just joked it was haunted and turned up the music. By 1 in the morning, I passed out on the couch with my boots still on and someone's hoodie for a pillow. I only woke when Mia shook me, her face pale and eyes huge. She didn't say much, just that she thought she heard someone whispering from the fireplace. I squinted at the dying embers and shrugged it off. It's the wind, I muttered, rolling over. She stood there for a long time, though. I remember that. The next morning, she looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she barely touched her food. I asked her again what she'd heard, and she just said it sounded like someone saying her name, over and over. I laughed, nervously, I admit now, but Tyler had a better explanation. Air pressure, he said, grinning like he knew something. Old chimneys do that. The wind blows down and echoes off the flue. Creates weird sounds. Like voices. There's a name for it, some physics crap. I didn't know if that was true, but I wanted it to be. Emma joked that the cabin was cursed, and we all laughed again. But Mia didn't. That afternoon, the forest started to feel off. The snow around the cabin was pristine, untouched, but I kept feeling like something had been there. A shape in the corner of my eye that vanished when I turned. The trees creaked too much, as if something heavy moved among them. Once, I thought I saw what looked like a soot-stained handprint high up on the cabin's window, on the outside. But it was gone before I could show anyone. I didn't say anything. I wish I had. That night, Mia refused to sleep. She sat on the floor by the window, wrapped in a blanket, just staring into the fireplace. The flames danced low and eerie, shadows crawling up the stone like fingers. I remember thinking how dark the chimney mouth looked, too dark, like a tunnel that didn't want to give anything back once it swallowed it. We tried to cheer her up, offered more drinks, even played cards, but the tension never left the room. By midnight, the power flickered once, then twice, then died completely. Just like that. Silence swallowed everything. And then, we heard it. A faint scuffle, like nails scratching brick. It came from inside the chimney. Tyler laughed nervously, shining his foam flashlight into the hearth. Probably an animal, he said, though his voice shook. But the sound came again, slower this time, deliberate, dragging itself downward. A heavy thump echoed deep inside the flue, followed by what I can only describe as a sigh. A long, aching, hollow breath. Emma gasped. Mia stood up without a word and backed away from the fireplace like it was growling at her. No one slept that night. And I swear, just before dawn, I saw something move up on the ceiling. Something too long, too jointless. It slipped across the beams like oil smeared across glass, clinging to the shadows as if afraid of the light. I froze. My mind told me not to blink. And then it was gone, but the dark it left behind felt heavier somehow, like it had soaked into the wood. I didn't tell the others. But that's when I realized it wasn't the cabin that was haunted. It was the chimney. And whatever was in there, whatever was whispering our names, it wasn't done with us yet. The morning after felt like waking up with a noose around your chest. The fire had long since gone out, and the air inside the cabin had turned bitterly cold, but no one dared to restart it. No one even looked at the fireplace. We sat there in stiff silence, sipping lukewarm coffee, each of us pretending that the night hadn't happened, that the noises from the chimney and the thing that crawled across the ceiling were just echoes of drink and exhaustion. But I could see it in their eyes, the same haunted tightness I felt in my own throat. Mia barely spoke. Her hands trembled so violently that she had to hold her mug with both just to keep it from spilling. And Tyler, who was always the loudest in the room, didn't crack a single joke that morning. He just stared out the window, jaw clenched, like he was waiting for something to appear among the trees. Emma tried to normalize things. She offered a hike. A stupid, cheerful idea that came out more like a plea than a suggestion. We all agreed, probably out of fear that staying inside would break us. The forest was gray and damp, the sky blanketed in clouds that never moved, and the snow had a strange crust over it, as if it had frozen mid-melt and then refused to thaw. Every step sounded louder than it should have, the crunch beneath our boots echoing like distant screams, though we didn't speak of it aloud. I kept looking back toward the cabin, its roof barely visible behind the twisted tree trunks. It looked smaller somehow, like it had sunk into the earth a little overnight. I told myself it was the angle, but even that thought didn't sit right. Something inside me kept whispering that the house didn't sink. It settled, as if it was growing roots. After the hike, Emma and I stayed back while the others went to gather firewood. Yes, we were going to relight the fire. Against our better judgment, we agreed. The cold was too much, and we convinced ourselves that nothing would happen if we just kept it small and stayed awake. We sat near the hearth, and I remember running my fingers along the brick, brushing over a rough, strange pattern etched into the stone just inside the chimney. It looked like a cluster of sharp, uneven lines, almost like claw marks, but there was something deliberate about them. A pattern too jagged to be random but too obscure to understand. I didn't say anything. I should have. When Mia returned with an armful of kindling, she saw me kneeling there and froze in the doorway. Her eyes locked on the marks, and her lips moved silently. Then she dropped everything and turned away without a word. That's when I began to feel truly afraid, not of the house, not even of what might have been inside the chimney, but of what Mia knew and wouldn't say. By dusk, the fire was burning again, though none of us sat close to it. The shadows it cast on the walls seemed too wild, like they weren't bound by the shape of the flames but moved with their own minds. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind, felt like a signal. It was hard to tell when the normal cabin noises ended and something else began. Sometime around midnight, the air shifted. It became thick and wet, like trying to breathe inside a fogged-up mirror. That's when the smell came. A rotten, bitter stench that curled out from the chimney and spread like smoke. Emma was the first to gag, clutching her mouth and stumbling toward the bathroom, but it didn't help. The stink was in the walls, in our clothes, in our throats. We opened the front door, desperate for air, but the forest outside had turned pitch black, like the night had sunk down over the world and refused to let go. That was when the screaming started. Not from outside. Not from the forest. It came from above. From inside the chimney. It wasn't loud at first. Just a faint, choked cry, like someone buried under too much weight, trying to breathe through crushed lungs. We stood frozen, the four of us clustered near the door like terrified animals. Then the sound rose. It grew in volume and pain, like whoever was inside the chimney had torn open their own mouth just to let it out. It wasn't just screaming, it was pleading, cursing, weeping. A dark, broken voice that cracked into words we couldn't quite understand. And then came the scraping. Slow, wet, deliberate. Something was coming down the chimney. Tyler ran forward, braver or dumber than the rest of us, I'll never know, and pointed his flashlight up the flue. We all heard him curse. Then he screamed. Not the sound of someone startled, but the kind of scream that rips out when something you believe to be impossible suddenly becomes undeniable. We yanked him back, hard, and he collapsed onto the floor, his flashlight spinning toward the ceiling. That's when we saw it. A figure. Or the shadow of one. Crawling across the ceiling upside down, its limbs too long, too thin, jointed in ways no human should move. Its skin, or what passed for it, looked slick, tar black, and dripping. It didn't fall. It flowed, as though gravity had let go of it. The face, I can't even call it a face, was just a hole where breath should be, whispering a sound that scraped my mind raw. Mia whispered, "Don't look at it." But I already had. We ran. Of course we did. Through the snow, into the forest, half blind and barefoot. We didn't even stop for coats. The cold meant nothing compared to that thing in the ceiling. We didn't stop until the trees thinned and the road appeared in the distance like salvation. But before we left, I turned. The cabin was lit from within, though no fire burned. Its windows pulsed, in and out, in perfect rhythm. Like lungs. Like breath. And I knew then. We hadn't stayed in that cabin. It had fed on us. The following days were a blur of sterile lights, wool blankets, and voices muffled through layers of disbelief. We told the ranger we'd gotten lost, spent a night in the woods, and panicked. Hypothermia. Hallucinations. That's what the doctor scribbled on my chart. The others nodded, smiled tightly, and played along. But I saw it in their eyes, that persistent shimmer of terror that doesn't fade with warmth or time. No one mentioned the chimney. No one dared say the word ceiling. We didn't talk about how the house had breathed, how it had opened itself like a mouth around us. Tyler never spoke again, not a single syllable since we pulled him off that floor. His eyes don't blink quite right anymore. Sometimes they move in slow, deliberate directions like he's watching things crawl just behind the walls. Mia left town first. Packed her car one early morning and didn't even tell us. She sent a single message before vanishing, "It follows warmth. Don't light anything." That was it. I didn't reply. What could I say? We tried to be rational, to force a sensible explanation onto something that had no logic, no name. But there was no one doing what we'd seen. You can't unhear a chimney scream. Emma tried to laugh about it once. Tried to say it was all just a shared nightmare, a group psychosis triggered by isolation and booze and maybe some mold spores. But her voice cracked halfway through and she excused herself to the bathroom, where I could hear her retching for 10 minutes. When she came back out, she avoided the fireplace like it radiated poison. We hadn't lit it since we returned, hadn't even gone near it. The house was freezing every night, but none of us dared strike a match. I slept in coats, under 4 blankets, teeth chattering, because the alternative was worse. Weeks passed, and I began to notice things. Smells that didn't belong. A burnt, sweet rot that hung in the corners of my apartment like the ghost of something decomposing. The walls would breathe sometimes, not visibly, not in any way you could show someone, but you felt it. That subtle pull and exhale, as though the plaster had lungs of its own. My dreams twisted. I'd wake up gasping, heart hammering, the taste of ash in my mouth, certain I'd heard something dragging across my ceiling. And sometimes, just before sleep pulled me under, I'd hear the faintest click and whisper from the fireplace in my living room, even though it had been sealed for years. One night, I snapped. I drove out to the cabin's location, hoping to find it boarded up, bulldozed, erased. But there was nothing. Not even a foundation. Just empty woods and a clearing too perfect to be natural, where the trees leaned outward, bending away from the center like something had grown too large and hungry and pushed them back. I stood there for hours in the dark, shivering, waiting. But nothing came. Nothing had to. It was already inside me. Now, the light flickers when I get too warm. The air thickens when I speak its memory aloud. I've removed all the heat sources from my apartment. No stove, no heater, no candles. I live in a cocoon of cold and silence, trying to starve it, whatever it is. But I don't think it cares. I think it's waiting. Watching. Somewhere just above the ceiling, mouth open, whispering smoke and soot into my ears while I try to sleep. And every night, I hear it breathe. I wasn't supposed to bring anything back. But the chimney was never just a chimney. The cabin was never just a cabin. It was a throat. And we were swallowed whole. The first night in the cabin should have been peaceful. It was supposed to be the escape we needed, just the two of us, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest neighbor. We found the cabin through an online listing, the kind that promised a serene getaway in the woods, where nature enveloped you in its calm embrace. The pictures on the website looked perfect, and the description promised silence, peace, and a touch of old-world charm. Maybe that's what drew us in. After months of living in the noise and chaos of city life, this seemed like a perfect reprieve. But that first night, things didn't feel right. It started with a sound, faint, but unmistakable. I was just starting to drift off, the soft rustle of the trees outside lulling me towards sleep when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. But it wasn't the kind of footsteps you expect in a house, not in the middle of the night. There was no creaking of floorboards, no shuffle of movement against a wooden floor. Instead, it was the sound of something, or someone, gliding across the carpet, light as air. I turned my head toward the dark outline of the door. The latch was still in place. I should have been used to the creaks and groans of an old building, but this felt different. I didn't move at first, afraid that if I did, the sound would stop, and I would be left wondering if it was all just in my head. But then it happened again. Closer this time. The air in the room felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting. The hairs on my neck prickled, and I could swear I saw something move in the corner of my eye, just a flicker, a shadow crossing the edge of the doorway. But when I turned, the room was empty. No one there. I glanced at Emily, her face still soft with sleep, oblivious to the strangeness. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the isolation getting to me. But the unease didn't leave. I tried to push the thought from my mind, to fall asleep despite the growing tension in the air. But sleep never came. Hours passed, and I lay there wide awake, listening. The sounds seemed to shift, to circle around the room. First one side, then the other. Sometimes it sounded like someone was pacing, sometimes like a whispering breath just beneath the edge of my hearing. I had to be imagining it, right? After all, the cabin was empty. The next morning, I brushed it off, though the unease still clung to me. Emily, ever the optimist, suggested we go for a hike, to clear our heads. We left the cabin in the bright morning light, the forest around us peaceful, calm. When we came back, it was a little after noon. I opened the door to the cabin and froze. There, in the corner of the room, was a figure. Not standing, not moving, but unmistakably there, frozen in the way shadows should never be. I stared at it, my heart skipping a beat, before I stepped inside. Emily followed behind me, and I quickly slammed the door shut, blinking away the haze of what I had seen. The room was still empty. But that feeling, that thick, oppressive feeling, like we were being watched, was still there. I couldn't shake it. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, noticing my change in demeanor. "Yeah," I lied. "It's just nothing." That night, when we settled back into bed, I heard it again. But this time, it was worse. The floor beneath us creaked, no, groaned, like something was walking across it, dragging itself along the smooth surface of the floorboards. But there was nothing there. It wasn't a wooden floor. The cabin's floors were all covered in carpet. My pulse quickened, and my eyes darted around the room, trying to find the source of the noise. I couldn't bring myself to look down. I had a sense that if I did, I would find something, someone, right there at the edge of the bed. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Emily didn't answer. I knew she had heard it too. And that's when the thought hit me, there was something in this house. Something that didn't sleep. I could almost hear its breath now, too, faint and rasping, just behind the walls. Something was waiting. And it didn't want us to know it was there. The next morning, when I checked the security cameras, I found something even more unsettling. There, in the footage, was the outline of a figure moving through the house, except it was just the two of us who were supposed to be home. It was impossible. but it was there, captured on video, walking through the rooms, just out of view. I froze as the footage continued, my mind racing. Was it real? Was it just a glitch? Or was the house really alive with something we couldn't see, something that didn't sleep? That day, we tried to act normal. We went for another walk in the woods, Emily chattering away about nothing in particular, and I followed her with a kind of mechanical effort, my mind far away. But even the fresh air couldn't cleanse the heaviness in my chest. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig beneath our feet seemed too sharp, too deliberate, as if the woods themselves were listening, watching. When we returned to the cabin, the sense of unease settled in like an old coat that wouldn't come off, hanging over my shoulders and weighing me down. The door creaked as I opened it, and a sharp chill ran down my spine. Inside, it was colder than before, the air too still, too heavy. I felt it the second I stepped over the threshold, the pressure of silence in the air, thicker than it had been earlier. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see something new. But everything seemed the same. The chairs, the table, the worn rug on the floor. Yet, the quiet felt wrong, as though it was trying to swallow me whole. I wanted to say something, to share the feeling with Emily, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing I wanted was to sound insane, especially when I couldn't even begin to explain what was happening. After a while, Emily disappeared into the kitchen, and I found myself pacing in the living room, staring at the camera feed on my phone. I scrolled through the footage again, my thumb moving in slow circles over the screen as I watched the figures in the house move, just out of view, barely perceptible. The footage was grainy, but I could see enough to make out the shape of someone walking through the hallway, as if they belonged there. The fact that the two of us were out on our walk, miles from the house at the time, made it impossible to explain. But somehow, in the back of my mind, I was already beginning to understand that this was not a glitch, not a trick of the light. Something else was there. Something had been in the house all along, watching us, following us. I turned to Emily, who was humming softly to herself in the kitchen, oblivious. Her voice cut through the silence, but the noise felt like it was coming from far away, as if her words were a dream I was still half asleep in. I stared at her for a long time, trying to feel normal again, but every inch of this house had become foreign to me, and with it, everything around me seemed to shift into something unrecognizable. I shook my head and forced myself to turn away. I couldn't look at her like this. I couldn't bear to share my fear with her, not when I couldn't even fully understand it myself. That night, as the darkness outside thickened, we lay in bed, both of us wide awake but pretending to sleep, as if by some miracle, we could escape the growing tension in the air. But sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. Not in this house. I could hear her breathing softly beside me, steady and rhythmic, but my own breaths felt tight, constricted, as if the air itself was refusing to let me inhale fully. And then, as I lay there in the dark, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor. But this time, the sound was closer, unmistakably so. It was no longer just the creak of the house settling. This was different. This was wrong. My heart started pounding in my chest, each beat a painful reminder that something was out there, something that was walking through the house, gliding silently from room to room, never resting. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the dark shadows of the room, waiting for something, anything, to move. The sound came again, this time so close I thought I could feel the vibration of the footsteps in the mattress beneath me. But when I turned, the room was still as death. No one was there. Emily stirred beside me, shifting under the covers, a soft sigh escaping her lips. I wanted to reach out, to grab her arm and pull her close, but I couldn't. I couldn't drag her into this nightmare when I wasn't sure how to escape it myself. I didn't know what to do, what to say. "Are you awake?" I whispered, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. Emily groaned softly, then mumbled something incoherent. But when I looked at her, her face was pale, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't asleep. She had heard it too. I didn't need to ask what she was thinking. I could feel the same horror closing in on her. Her body tensed, and she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out. But the sound didn't stop. It continued, just beneath the surface of everything, like a whisper that never reached our ears fully, but we could still sense it, like it was always there, crawling under our skin. I wanted to tell her to get up, to leave, to run out of this place before it swallowed us whole. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything except lie there, waiting for the nightmare to pass. I could feel the air shift, thickening with every passing second. And just when I thought I might lose my mind, the sound stopped. For a moment, everything was still again, and I thought we might finally be alone. But then, from the floor beneath us, came the slow, dragging scrape, something heavy, something alive, moving across the carpet with a steady, relentless rhythm. And then, I heard a voice, soft, low, and familiar. Emily. She whispered my name, the fear in her voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. Are you sure we're alone? She asked. I couldn't answer her. The answer, whatever it was, didn't matter anymore. It was clear now that in this house, no one slept. Not really. And whatever was here, it wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever. The night stretched on, hours bleeding together in a haze of cold dread and sharp, suffocating silence. I kept my eyes glued to the shadows in the room, expecting something, anything, to appear, but all I could do was wait for the next sound, the next sign that we weren't alone. Emily's breath was shallow beside me, and I could feel the terror radiating from her, a palpable presence in the room that made it hard to breathe. I wanted to hold her, to reassure her that everything was going to be okay, but I knew, deep down, that no words could undo what was happening here. There was no comfort to be found in this place, no escape from the suffocating sense of something lurking just beyond our reach, hidden in the spaces between the walls, under the floorboards. Eventually, I gave in to the impulse to check the camera footage again, my fingers trembling as I swiped through the images. The grainy footage from earlier that day seemed to mock me, as though it had known this was coming. But this time, something was different. The figures in the footage were clearer, more distinct. I saw them moving through the hall, but they weren't walking, they were gliding, drifting through the air as if they had no weight at all. It wasn't just the two of us in the house anymore. There were others. They weren't in any hurry, moving at a pace that was deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world, and we were simply guests in their space, intruders, really. I could see one of the figures standing in the hallway, just outside the living room, staring at the camera, its shape almost human but not quite. It was too still, too cold, and something about the way it held its form made me want to look away. But I couldn't. I was frozen to the screen, my heart racing in my chest. Emily shifted beside me, a soft gasp escaping her lips as she glanced at the phone, her eyes widening in horror as she saw what I was seeing. She didn't need to say anything. The fear in her face was enough to tell me that we were both thinking the same thing. They were already here. They had been here all along, watching us, waiting for us to realize. I turned off the screen, dropping the phone onto the bed with a dull thud. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet of the room, a reminder that we were trapped here, that there was no way out. I wanted to scream, to beg for this nightmare to end, but the fear had stolen my voice. I couldn't even move. I could only wait. The scraping noise from the floor returned, louder this time, more insistent, as if whatever was beneath us had grown impatient, restless. It moved closer, and the sound of the heavy, dragging footsteps made my stomach churn. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was unraveling, each thought splintering like shards of glass in my brain. What were we supposed to do? How were we supposed to fight something we couldn't even see? Something that moved like a shadow, something that didn't play by the rules of the world we understood. I climbed out of bed slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and I found myself standing in the middle of the room, staring at the door. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But something kept me there, something invisible and powerful, as if the house itself were holding me captive, preventing me from moving. I could hear Emily's soft sobs in the darkness, her terror now palpable, wrapping itself around both of us. She was awake, aware, just as trapped as I was. Then came the whisper, a voice, soft and low, as though it were right beside me, brushing against my ear. We don't sleep. The words were so close that I could feel them, like a breath, cold and unnatural, against my skin. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty as it had been when we first entered. And yet, something was wrong. Something had changed. I looked at Emily, who was now sitting up, her eyes wide with shock. She must have heard it too. Her mouth opened, as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She seemed frozen in place, caught in some kind of trance. The floor beneath us groaned, as though something was pushing against it, testing it, trying to break through. And then I saw it. A shadow, long and twisting, creeping out from the corner of the room where the floor met the wall. It slithered across the carpet like a living thing, dark and formless, with no clear shape but an unmistakable presence. I took a step backward, my heart hammering in my chest, but the shadow was already closer, its movement unnatural, fluid, as if it existed in a space that wasn't quite our own. My breath caught in my throat, and I watched in horror as it reached out toward Emily. I tried to scream, to run, but nothing happened. My voice was trapped inside me, my body paralyzed with terror. I reached out, desperate to pull her away, but the shadow was faster. It was already wrapping itself around her, pulling her into the darkness. I closed my eyes, the last shred of my sanity breaking as I heard Emily's breathless gasp and the soft, terrifying whisper again, "We don't sleep." And just like that, it was over. There was no more sound. No more movement. Just silence, heavy and oppressive, in the house that no one slept in. The last thing I remember is the camera feed flickering on the phone. The image was grainy again, but now I could see it clearly, the figures in the house, standing in the hallway, watching the room, unmoving, their eyes fixed on me, waiting. Waiting for what? And then, nothing. The feed cut out, and the screen went black. In this house, no one sleeps. But we're not alone. And we never will be.